The last streaks of daylight bled across the Wyoming basin like molten copper, staining the sky with a restless glow. Caleb Morgan tightened the reins and let his blue roan gelding pick a careful path down the shale-littered ridge. Dust swirled around the horse's legs, ghosting upward in thin, coppery spirals that caught the dying sun. He tasted grit on his teeth and the metallic tang of coming weather on the back of his tongue. The range below stretched wide and hollow, a quilt of brittle sage and sandstone folds. In the distance, the Bighorn Mountains hunched against the horizon, their purple flanks bruised by shadow. The air smelled of cold iron and dry grass, promising an early winter. Caleb's shoulders ached from the long day, but he welcomed the ache. It reminded him that his body could still work, still endure. He leaned forward and patted the gelding's damp neck. "Nearly home, Blue," he murmured. The horse flicked an ear, breathing hard, steam curling from his nostrils. A sudden clang of metal rang out from the hollow below, sharp and deliberate. Caleb stiffened. It was too late for a rancher's routine. No branding irons or gate chains at this hour. He slid a calloused hand to the stock of the Winchester carbine tied to his saddle. Another sound followed, a man's barked order, then the panicked bleat of cattle. Caleb nudged Blue toward a stand of wind-gnarled cottonwoods that overlooked the basin floor. From the shadows, he scanned the low ground. Lantern light bobbed near the creek bend where his south fence ran. 3 riders in dark coats surrounded a cluster of cattle. His cattle, driving them toward the gap in the fence he had mended only yesterday. The night breeze carried their laughter, harsh and triumphant. "Rustlers," he muttered, the word a dry stone in his throat. The lead rider wheeled his horse and shouted again. Even at a distance, the man's tall frame and stiff posture were unmistakable. Silas Byrne. Caleb's jaw tightened. Byrne owned the neighboring double-spur spread, a man who treated the open range like a chessboard and other ranchers like pawns. For months he had been pressuring Caleb to sell, claiming the Morgan acreage would fit neat inside a real operation. Caleb's repeated refusals had brought thinly veiled threats and missing fence rails. Now the man had dropped the veil altogether. Caleb's pulse drummed in his ears. He counted 8 of his own yearlings in the lantern glow. 8 he could not afford to lose. The bank already circled like a hawk over his debts. Another cut to the herd would draw blood he could not spare. He dismounted silently and crouched beside the cottonwoods. The dry grass hissed in the wind, masking his movements. He raised the Winchester, sighting down the barrel. He could scare them off with a single shot overhead, but Byrne would spin that into an act of aggression, maybe drag the law to Caleb's door. Below, Byrne's men prodded the cattle forward. A heifer bawled and stumbled, breaking free for an instant. Byrne spurred his horse hard, blocking her escape with a practiced sweep. His voice carried clear across the basin. "Push him faster. We're ghosts before moonrise." Caleb's teeth clenched. Ghosts, were they? Not tonight. He lowered the rifle and stepped into the open. That's far enough. The shout cracked across the basin like a whip. Horses shied. Lantern lights swung wildly. Byrne reined around, his silhouette sharp against the rising moon. "Evening, Morgan," he called, his tone mock-pleasant. "Fine night for a ride." "Turn those cattle back," Caleb said, voice steady but edged like cut glass. "They wear my brand." "Do they now?" Byrne's chuckle was low and cold. Hard to tell brands in this light. Maybe they wandered. "Not through a mended fence," Caleb shot back. He kept the Winchester angled but ready. "You know you're trespassing." Byrne's men shifted uneasily, their horses sidestepping. The wind carried the scent of sage and storm. Somewhere above, a hawk screamed, startled from its roost. Byrne tilted his head, lantern light catching the pale scar along his jaw. "You think that pea shooter scares me?" "I think the law might," Caleb replied. "And you'll need the law when one of those steers goes lame on stolen ground." Silence stretched. The cattle huddled, snorting clouds of white into the cooling air. Caleb's finger rested against the trigger guard, not on it. Enough for Byrne to notice. At last Byrne spat into the dirt. "You've got grit, Morgan. I'll grant you that." He wheeled his horse with a hard jerk of the reins. "But grit won't pay your debts." He signaled his men. Reluctant but obedient, They turned the cattle, prodding them back through the gap. Caleb felt the tension ease a fraction, though his shoulders remained tight as cable. Byrne lingered a moment longer, his gaze a challenge in the dark. "This land will break you before winter's through," he said quietly, almost intimate. "And when it does, I'll be waiting." Then he kicked his horse and vanished into the night, his men following like shadows pulled by the wind. Caleb exhaled, the breath a cloud that mingled with the basin's cold. He waited until the last hoofbeat faded before lowering the rifle. Blue whickered softly behind him. Caleb stroked the gelding's muzzle, feeling the tremor of contained energy. "Easy, boy." We held our ground. He inspected the fence gap, the fresh axe marks where Byrne's crew had cut the rails clean. He would have to mend it again at first light. But it wasn't the fence that worried him most. It was Byrne's parting words, coiled with promise and threat. The moon slid higher, throwing silver over the sage. Caleb glanced toward the distant glow of Byrne's ranch house. A single lantern burned there, steady as a watching eye. He swung into the saddle and turned toward home, the cold biting deeper with each gust. In the pit of his stomach, unease coiled tighter than the night wind. Byrne had tested his resolve once. He would come again, and next time, the stakes might be higher than a handful of cattle. Caleb urged Blue into a canter, the rhythmic hoofbeats echoing across the empty plains. Somewhere in the darkness, he sensed a storm gathering, one that would demand more than fences and rifles. And before the week was out, he would discover that Byrne's schemes reached beyond land and cattle, toward a young woman whose silent plea would change everything. A restless wind skimmed across the valley as night settled over the double-spur lanterns glimmered against the black swell of hills, each yellow flame a silent warning. Caleb Morgan rode at an easy lope along the creek trail, Blue's hooves muffled by soft mud. He told himself he'd only come to check the far fence again, but he knew better. After last night's standoff with Silas Byrne, his blood still thrummed with a vigilance he couldn't quiet. The Byrne house loomed ahead, a squat fortress of stone and timber ringed by corrals and barns. Its windows glowed like watchful eyes. Even from the shadow trail, Caleb caught the scent of fresh-cut hay and smoke from the great kitchen chimney. A wolf's lonely howl floated from the ridgeline, quickly swallowed by the wind. He dismounted beside a stand of junipers and crouched, scanning the yard. A pair of hired men leaned against the bunkhouse rail, their laughter sharp as a knife scrape. Another patrolled the barn, lantern swinging in lazy arcs. Caleb's gut tightened. These weren't the casual rhythms of ranch hands. They were sentries. A sudden clatter broke from the back porch. A door slammed, followed by a muffled cry. Caleb's head snapped toward the sound. In the thin slice of moonlight, a slender figure stumbled into the yard, skirts whipping in the gust. The girl moved quickly, but not recklessly, glancing over her shoulder with each step. Even at a distance, Caleb saw the tension in her posture, the coiled energy of someone accustomed to danger. She clutched a small bundle to her chest and kept to the darkest shadows along the barn wall. Before Caleb could weigh his next move, another door banged open. Silas Byrne strode out, lantern in hand, his broad shoulders blotting the light behind him. "Lydia," he barked. The single word cracked through the yard like a rifle shot. The girl froze. Caleb pressed himself into the junipers, heart pounding. Lydia, that was the orphan niece folks in town whispered about, the one Byrne had taken in for family's sake. Rumor said she was barely 18. Rumor also said Byrne ruled his household with a hard fist. Byrne advanced, boots crunching on the gravel. "You think you can slip off like a thief?" His voice carried a cruel edge. "Answer me, girl." "I'm not your property," Lydia shot back, her tone quiet but steady. "I only meant to walk." Caleb glimpsed her face as the lantern swung closer, delicate features set in a defiant line, eyes bright as flint. Byrne stopped a yard away, towering over her. "You'll walk when I say you can walk." He reached for her arm. Caleb's breath tightened. He'd confronted Byrne over stolen cattle. Now he watched the man lay claim to a human being. Lydia twisted free. "My parents never gave you leave to rule me," she said, voice trembling but unbroken. "You promised to keep me safe, not sell me off." Byrne's jaw flexed. A roof and food cost money. A marriage to Cormac Weller will settle debts on both sides. You'll thank me when you've grown some sense. I'll never. Burns seized her wrist. She gasped, the sound cutting through Caleb like barbed wire. Before thought could catch him, Caleb stepped from the shadows. Let her go. The words rang across the yard, sharp as a hammer strike. The hired hand straightened, startled. Burn turned, lantern light carving his features into hard planes. Morgan, he said, voice low and dangerous. You've developed a habit of trespassing. Caleb advanced, rifle held easy but ready. Looks like you've developed a habit of manhandling people who can't fight back. This is family business. Burns' grip on Lydia tightened. Not yours. She's of age, Caleb replied. The law might disagree with your idea of guardianship. Burns' eyes narrowed. You planning to test that law with a bullet? Only if you give me cause. For a breath the yard stilled. The hired men shifted uneasily, their hands nowhere near their holsters. The wind moaned through the cottonwoods, scattering dry leaves across the packed earth. Lydia wrenched her arm free and stepped toward Caleb. I choose to leave, she said, her voice clear despite the tremor. Now. Burns stared at her, the muscle in his jaw twitching. You walk off this land and you'll regret it. The winter's cruel, and Morgan can barely keep his own herd alive. I'll take my chances, she said. Caleb felt a surge of admiration, fierce, protective. He kept the rifle trained loosely at his side. You heard her, Burn. For a long moment Burn said nothing. The lantern flame hissed, throwing wild shadows across the barn wall. Finally he spat into the dirt, the sound sharp in the quiet. Run if you like, he said, voice low with threat. But don't think this ends here. He turned on his heel and strode back toward the house, shoulders stiff with restrained fury. The bunkhouse men melted into the dark, unwilling to follow. Caleb lowered the rifle, but kept his eyes on Burn until the door slammed. Only then did he face Lydia. Up close she looked younger, though her posture carried an iron steadiness. Strands of chestnut hair whipped across her cheeks in the restless wind. You sure about this? He asked quietly. I can't stay, she said. Not after tonight. Not ever. Her voice was hoarse but resolute. She clutched the small bundle tighter. A few cloves, maybe, or keepsakes from a life already stolen. Caleb scanned the dark ridges beyond the yard. The trail home was long, the night cold, and Burns' threat still hung like a storm cloud. My place isn't much safer, he admitted, and Burn won't let this lie. I'll work, she said quickly. Cook, mend fences, anything. I just need freedom. Something in the way she said the word struck him like a hammer. Not plea, but declaration. The wind carried a distant rumble, thunder, or the echo of hooves. Caleb couldn't tell. He tightened the cinch on Blue's saddle and offered her a steady hand. Then we ride before that storm, or Burn catches us. Lydia hesitated only a heartbeat before slipping her fingers into his. Her grip was strong. Behind them, a lantern flared suddenly in an upstairs window, throwing a long, searching beam across the yard. Caleb swung Lydia onto Blue's back and vaulted up behind her. The first cold drops of rain spattered the dust as he wheeled the gelding toward the dark hills. From the house came the slam of another door and the faint, furious echo of Burn's shout. Caleb dug in his heels. Blue surged forward, hooves drumming a rapid tattoo against the hard earth. The wind rose, carrying the girl's quickened breath and the scent of imminent storm. Somewhere behind, the double spur blazed with new lanterns, a nest of angry light, and the promise of pursuit. The night deepened to an iron black, thick with the scent of sage and the promise of rain. Caleb urged Blue along a narrow deer track that wound between jagged outcrops. Lydia rode pillion, her arms tight around his waist, her cheek against the rough wool of his coat. Each hoofbeat landed like a drum in the hush, and every echo felt too loud. Behind them, faint but steady, came the distant thunder of pursuit. Burns' riders were on the move. Caleb angled toward the north ridge, hoping to lose their trail in the maze of arroyos beyond the creek. The air grew colder, sharper, needling his lungs. Overhead, clouds swallowed the moon, leaving only the ghostly shimmer of starlight. Hold fast, he said over his shoulder. I can, Lydia whispered, voice thin with fear but steady. The first drops of rain arrived like cold coins on Caleb's face. He welcomed them. Wet ground would hide hoof prints. Yet the storm brought its own dangers, slick rock, sudden floods, lightning that could spook even Blue's steady heart. A shout cut through the wind. Closer now. Burns' men had found their direction. Caleb felt Lydia stiffen. They're gaining, she said. Not if we keep high. He veered upslope, the gelding scrambling over loose shale. Stones clattered down the incline, a clamor that made Caleb wince. The ridge flattened into a plateau scattered with boulders and gnarled pines. From here, he could see the glint of lanterns weaving through the lower draw. 3, maybe 4 riders. Their light bobbed like malevolent fireflies. Caleb guided Blue toward a stand of pines. Needles hissed in the wind, their resinous scent sharp and clean. He swung down and helped Lydia dismount. We lead him from here, he said, voice low. Quieter. Rain thickened to a misty sheet, slicking their coats. Lydia clutched her small bundle and followed as Caleb took Blue's bridle and moved between the trees. Each step sank in damp needles, mercifully silent. A sudden crack of thunder split the sky. Blue shied, muscles bunching, but Caleb murmured a steadying word. Lightning flared, bleaching the world to silver for a heartbeat, and in that flash Caleb saw riders cresting the lower rise. Burns' voice carried, raw with fury. Find them. Morgan won't keep what's mine. Lydia flinched. Caleb's chest tightened at the possessive claim. You're not his, he said quietly, meeting her gaze. Even in the dimness, he caught the spark of defiance there. They pressed on, weaving through rocks slick with rain. The plateau narrowed toward a narrow ravine that opened to the north basin. If they could reach the creek beyond, the swollen water might mask their trail completely. Another flash lit the sky. A rifle cracked, the shot whining off a boulder yards away. Lydia gasped. Keep moving, Caleb urged. He handed her Blue's reins and pulled the Winchester free. His eyes swept the darkness for movement. A rider broke from the trees behind them, a hulking silhouette against the lightning-streaked clouds. Caleb raised the carbine and fired a warning shot into the air. The echo thundered through the ravine. The rider jerked back, horse rearing, but did not retreat. Caleb's jaw tightened. He didn't want bloodshed, but he would not let Burn drag Lydia back to that house of threats and bargains. Caleb. Lydia pointed toward a cleft in the rock wall, half hidden by brush. There. He guided Blue through the gap, shoulders scraping stone. The passage opened onto a narrow ledge above the roaring creek. The water below churned wild and black, foam bright in the intermittent lightning. Behind them came the pounding of hooves and the harsh clatter of stones. Caleb glanced back. 2 riders now, silhouettes closing fast. Down the ledge, he said, gripping Lydia's hand. Single file. The ledge sloped steeply toward a gravel bar at the creek's edge. Rain slicked the rock, each step a gamble. Caleb kept one hand on Lydia, the other on Blue's bridle, murmuring to steady horse and human alike. Halfway down, a shot rang out. Sparks leapt from the rock, near Caleb's boot. The smell of burned powder mixed with the wet earth scent of the storm. That's close, Lydia breathed. They'll have to shoot straighter than that, Caleb said, though his heart pounded hard enough to shake his voice. At the bottom, he swung Lydia onto Blue's back and vaulted up behind her. The creek foamed before them, swollen but not yet impassable. Beyond it lay the tangled cottonwood flats, perfect for losing a trail. We cross, he said. She nodded, eyes wide but resolute. Caleb urged Blue forward. The gelding plunged into the icy current, water surging to the stirrups. Spray soaked them, cold enough to steal breath. Caleb gripped the reins tight, guiding the horse's sure steps across slippery stones. Midway through, another rifle shot cracked. Water spouted inches from Blue's flank. The horse lunged, muscles bunching with fear. Caleb held firm, murmuring low, until they scrambled onto the far bank. They didn't pause. Caleb angled into the cottonwood grove, where shadows layered thick, and the storm's roar drowned all sound. Branches whipped their faces, wet leaves slapped against coats. Behind them the creek thundered, a living barrier. Only when the trees swallowed them completely did Caleb slow. Blue's sides heaved, steam rising in the cold rain. Lydia leaned against Caleb, trembling but upright. "They'll try the ford," she said. "Not in this flood," he answered. "Not if they value their necks." Still he listened. Through the drum of rain, he caught faint curses from the far bank, then the diminishing clatter of retreating hooves. Relief loosened the knot in his chest, but not the vigilance. Byrne would not stop. Tonight was only the opening move. Caleb guided Blue deeper into the woods until the trees formed a dense, dripping canopy. There he found a small hollow sheltered by fallen trunks. He dismounted and helped Lydia down. She stood with arms wrapped around herself, rain plastering her hair to her cheeks. "We made it," she said, voice a mix of awe and exhaustion. "For now," Caleb replied. He scanned the darkness, every sense tuned to the night. Lydia met his gaze, eyes bright despite the cold. "I won't go back," she said, "no matter what he threatens." The fierceness in her tone sent a current through him, respect, and something deeper he dared not name. "You won't," he said, "not while I'm breathing." Thunder rolled again, closer this time. Caleb felt the storm gathering its full force. They needed a fire, dry ground, a plan for the dawn. He turned toward the north trail, where the cottonwoods thinned. Beyond that lay his ranch, and more danger. Byrne would come again, with lawmen or worse. Caleb knew the fight had only begun. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying a distant echo, a horn blast, low and deliberate, rising from the direction of Byrne's land. A signal, not retreat. Caleb met Lydia's questioning glance. "They're calling more men," he said quietly. "This night's far from over." Rain drummed harder, mingling with the creek's roar, as the dark woods seemed to tighten around them. Dawn broke pale and cold across the Morgan ranch, the first light spreading like thin milk over the frost-silvered grass. Caleb pushed the cabin door open and drew a long breath of cedar smoke and wet earth. The storm had passed, leaving a sharp clarity in the air, but tension still lay heavy as a hidden spring. Behind him Lydia stirred, rising from the narrow bunk they'd shared only for warmth against the night chill. She wrapped his spare coat tight around her shoulders, the hem brushing the plank floor. Stray strands of chestnut hair framed eyes, still bright with the defiance that had carried them through the midnight chase. "You don't sleep much," she said softly. "Too many fences to mend," Caleb replied, though he hadn't touched a hammer. His mind kept circling the sound of that distant horn, Byrne's call for reinforcements. Outside, the range glistened. Cattle lowed in the near pasture, their breath puffing white in the brittle air. Caleb scanned the ridgeline. No riders yet, but he felt the day coiled to strike. By mid-morning the ranch hands arrived from the line camps, their curiosity barely hidden. 2 seasoned cowboys, Reed and Joss, swung down from their horses and eyed Lydia with guarded interest. "Morning, boss," Reed said. "Heard trouble near the double spur last night. Folks in town whisper Byrne's riled." Caleb kept his tone even. "He's riled because he's guilty. We'll keep our work steady." Reed's gaze flicked to Lydia. "That the reason he's riled?" "She's under my protection," Caleb said. "That's all anyone needs to know." The men exchanged a look but nodded. Loyalty ran deeper than gossip on this ranch, but Caleb knew word would spread faster than prairie fire. All day Lydia worked alongside them. She fetched water, patched harness leather, and held a steady ladder as Caleb checked the windmill blades. Her determination struck the crew silent. When Reed offered to haul the heavy buckets, she only smiled. "I can carry my share," she said, voice calm but edged with pride. By late afternoon the sky darkened again, though no storm brewed. It was the kind of sullen gray that pressed on the land like a held breath. Caleb felt it in his bones. Trouble was near. The trouble announced itself with the sharp crack of hooves on frozen earth. For riders crested the south ridge, Byrne in front, his black coat snapping in the wind. 2 deputies rode with him, lawmen by badge if not by heart, and a hired gun whose hand never strayed far from his holster. Caleb met them at the corral gate, Winchester cradled, but not aimed. Lydia stood just inside the fence, back straight, eyes fixed on Byrne. "Morning, Morgan," Byrne called, voice oily with false courtesy. "You've got something of mine." Caleb kept his stance relaxed. Everything here bears my brand. Not her. Burns' gaze slashed toward Lydia. That girl's a ward of my household, placed under my care by her late father's will. That's a lie, Lydia said, stepping forward. Her voice carried clear over the wind. My parents left no such paper. I'm 18. I stay where I choose. Burns' smile tightened. The sheriff may find your word thin, girl. One deputy, a square-jawed man named Harkins, shifted uneasily. She of age, Burn? 18. She's a runaway minor, Burn snapped. I was born the spring the Great Flood took the bridge at Casper, Lydia said, unflinching. Check the church record if you doubt it. Harkins scratched his chin. That was 18 years back, right enough. Burns' color darkened. Don't be fooled by a slip of a girl and a stubborn rancher, he growled. She's my responsibility until I say otherwise. Caleb took one step forward, voice low but firm. You've no claim. The law gives her choice, and she's made it. Burns' hired gun nudged his horse closer, hand brushing the butt of his pistol. The deputy stiffened but didn't move. The corral horses stamped and tossed their heads, restless at the charged air. Caleb felt the old, cold calm settle in, the same clarity that had steadied him in last night's chase. He lifted the Winchester just enough to make intent clear. You'll leave my land, he said, each word clipped like wire. Burn glared, a snake coil to strike. You think a rifle and a girl's stubborn tongue will hold me off forever? Not forever, Caleb said. Just long enough for the truth to stick. Lydia stepped to Caleb's side, chin high. I will speak that truth in town if I must. Everyone will know how you treated me, like stock to be traded. A muscle worked in Burns' jaw. He flicked a glance at the deputies, gauging their loyalty. Harkins met his look with a thin, unsmiling stare. This isn't over, Burns said finally, the words a hiss. Winter's long. Circumstances change. Then you'd best prepare for a hard winter, Caleb answered. For a heartbeat no one moved. The only sound was the low murmur of cattle and the cold wind rattling the dry cornstalks. Burn jerked his reins and wheeled his horse. The deputies followed, silent. The hired gun lingered a second longer, eyes flat and unreadable, then turned to ride after his employer. Caleb lowered the Winchester, but kept watching until they disappeared over the ridge. Only when the last hoofbeat faded did he let the breath leave his lungs. Lydia released a trembling sigh. He'll come back. Yes, Caleb said, but now the law's seen his bluff. She looked up at him, resolve bright beneath the lingering fear. I won't run again. Caleb studied the horizon, where the sky darkened like a bruise. He believed her. Yet Burns' retreat felt too easy. A step back before a harder strike. Reed approached, hat in hand. Boss will stand with you, he said quietly. Whatever Burn tries next. Appreciate it, Caleb replied. The wind shifted, carrying the faint smell of distant smoke, wood, or something harsher. Caleb's stomach tightened. Somewhere beyond the ridge, Burn was already plotting. He turned to Lydia. Tonight we keep watch. He's not finished. She nodded, her eyes fierce despite the chill. Neither are we. The fading light cast long bars of shadow across the yard, dark and uncertain. Caleb felt the land itself holding its breath, waiting for the next move in a game that had only begun. Snow sifted down and dry, whispering flakes as dusk gathered over the Morgan ranch. The world lay muted beneath a sky the color of gunmetal, every sound hushed except the soft creak of settling drifts. Caleb Morgan stood at the corral gate, breath steaming in the brittle air. The day's last light painted the mountains in bruised violet, a warning of deeper cold to come. Inside the cabin Lydia fed the stove, its glow flickering against the frosted window panes. She had spent the afternoon teaching a half-dozen neighbor children their letters, a small act of defiance and hope. Caleb watched the lamplight on her face and felt a tug in his chest, admiration sharpened by the knowledge that Burn would not leave them in peace. A distant crunch of hooves broke the stillness. Caleb's hand went to the Winchester leaning against the gatepost. Through the pale snowfall emerged a dark column of riders. Lanterns bobbed like cold stars among them. At the head, Unmistakable in his long black coat, rode Silas Byrne. Caleb's pulse steadied into a deliberate rhythm. He stepped into the yard, boots grinding over ice. Behind him the cabin door opened. Lydia appeared, coat wrapped tight, eyes fixed on the approaching men. Byrne reined in 10 yards from the corral. 5 others fanned out behind him. 2 deputies from town, a pair of ranch hands, and the silent gunman Caleb had faced before. Their breath smoked like dragons in the chill. "Morgan," Byrne called, voice carrying easily through the still air. "You've had your fun. Time to give the girl back." Caleb rested a hand on the Winchester. "She's not yours to take." Byrne's eyes narrowed, pale in the lantern glow. "She's a runaway minor. Sheriff's here to see it settled." One deputy, Harkins, lifted a gloved hand. "Byrne, we went over this. Church records show she's 18. The law says she's free to choose." "She's under my guardianship until she marries," Byrne snapped. "That was her father's wish." Lydia stepped forward, snow crunching beneath her boots. "My father wished only for my safety," she said, voice ringing clear. "You broke that trust the day you tried to barter me off." The hired gun shifted in his saddle, eyes cold. Caleb caught the movement and angled the rifle across his chest. "Best keep that hand still," he said. Byrne's gaze flicked between Caleb and Lydia. "You think a stubborn girl and a small-time rancher can stand against a winter like this?" He gestured to the dark hills, the endless snow. "I own the feed stores. I hold the bank note on half this county. When the cold bites, pride won't fill your bellies." Caleb felt the truth of those words in the chill that seeped through his coat. His own debts weighed like an anvil. Yet he also saw Lydia's shoulders square, her breath fogging steady and strong. "We'll manage," Caleb said, "with honest work and neighbors who don't trade people like cattle." Byrne's jaw tightened. "Neighbors don't pay debts. I'll have this land before spring, one way or another." He nudged his horse closer until only the corral rails separated them. "Last chance, Morgan. Hand her over, and I might forget the trespass, the stolen stock, the insults." Caleb met his gaze, steady as the mountains behind him. Not a chance. The wind rose, carrying a fine sting of ice. Snow swirled between the men, like ghostly smoke. Byrne's hired gun slid a finger along his pistol grip. Harkins cleared his throat. "Easy now. No need for blood over words." Byrne ignored him. "You'll regret this," he said, voice low and flat. "I'll see your herd starve. I'll see the bank take your roof." Caleb felt a flicker of doubt. Then Lydia's hand brushed his sleeve, a quiet anchor. Her eyes shone with the same fire he'd seen when she first defied Byrne's grip. "This ranch isn't for sale," Caleb said, "and neither is she." For a long heartbeat nothing moved. The only sound was the dry hiss of falling snow. Then Byrne hissed through his teeth and yanked his reins. His horse danced sideways, hooves striking sparks on the frozen ground. "This winter will break you," he spat. "When it does, you'll crawl to me." He wheeled his mount and signaled the retreat. The deputies followed, their expressions guarded. The hired gun lingered, eyes like shards of ice, then turned without a word. Caleb kept the Winchester raised until the column melted into the snow-heavy dusk. Only when the last lantern winked out did he lower the rifle. Lydia exhaled, a sound of both relief and resolve. "He'll try again," she said. "Yes," Caleb answered, but he's shown his hand. The law heard everything tonight. She looked toward the dark horizon where Byrne had vanished. "The law may be slow. Winter is faster." Caleb knew she was right. The storm thickened, wind driving snow in sharp needles across the yard. He felt the weight of the coming months, the hunger, the cold, the relentless pressure Byrne would surely wield through merchants and bankers. Inside, the cabin's lamplight glowed like a promise. Caleb touched Lydia's shoulder, the gesture both protective and a silent question. "We'll fight," she said, answering what he hadn't spoken. "Not just against him. Against the cold, the hunger. Together." A gust of wind rattled the corral rails like bones. Caleb tightened his grip on the Winchester. Together. The word warmed more than any fire. Yet in the whirling dark he thought he heard another sound. Faint, deliberate, apart from a storm. A distant crack of timber, perhaps, or the echo of a rider circling wide through the trees. He turned toward the hills, senses sharpened. Somewhere out there, beyond the veil of snow, Silas Burns' next move had already begun. A black dawn smothered the valley, moonless and sharp as a whetted blade. Caleb Morgan woke to the dry pop of wood in the stove and the faint scent of smoke that did not belong. He swung his legs from the bunk and felt the floorboards cold as river stone. Outside, the wind carried a bitter tang of burning pine. Lydia stirred beside the stove, already dressed, her eyes wide. "Do you smell it?" she whispered. Caleb snatched the Winchester from the wall. "Stay behind me." He pushed through the cabin door into a night thick with icy smoke. Across the south pasture an orange glow flickered against the low clouds. The hay barn, his winter lifeline, burned like a torch. Sparks rode the wind toward the corrals. Boots pounding, Caleb crossed the yard. Snow squealed underfoot. Each gust slapped embers across the hard crust of ice. He yanked the pump handle and sent a stuttering stream into a bucket, but the fire leapt higher, greedier than any bucket could quench. Behind him came the quick drumming of hooves. Figures emerged from the dark. Reed and Joss from the bunkhouse, pulling a sledge of water barrels. Behind them, Lydia followed, shawl wrapped tight, her breath a white ribbon. "Damn wind's against us," Reed shouted. "This blaze is set. Smells of lamp oil." Caleb's jaw clenched. "Burn. Keep the corral wet," Caleb barked. "Save the herd if nothing else." They formed a rough line, passing buckets, dousing the fence as the barn roared like a furnace. Sparks swirled into the sky, a false dawn of firelight. Lydia hauled water alongside the men, her face streaked with ash, but fierce with purpose. A rifle crack split the night. Snow at Caleb's feet spat upward. He dropped behind the trough, scanning the dark ridge. Another shot rang out, echoing off the frozen hills. "There!" Joss pointed toward a stand of juniper at the far edge of the pasture. A shadow moved, a mounted rider, backlit by the flames. Caleb steadied the Winchester. The figure lifted an arm, another muzzle flash flaring in answer. The shot whined past Reed's shoulder. "Get down!" Caleb barked. He sighted on the rider and fired. The echo thundered across the valley. The figure ducked low but didn't fall. "Burn!" Caleb shouted into the wind. "Face me, coward!" The rider wheeled the horse, keeping to the trees. Another shot cracked, splintering the corral rail. The herd bawled, hooves churning the frozen ground. Lydia crawled to Caleb's side, eyes bright with fear and defiance. "He means to drive us out tonight," she said. "Not while I stand." Caleb growled. He signaled Reed and Joss to keep the water line moving, then slid into the shadow of the barn's far wall. The heat baked through his coat, painting his skin with a dry, searing sting. He moved low and fast, the Winchester snug to his shoulder, tracking the flicker of motion along the ridge. A sudden silence fell. The gunfire stopped. Only the barn roared, timbers groaning as they collapsed inward. Caleb strained to hear over the rush of flame. Then the horse neighed sharply. A second shadow appeared beside the first. Someone else had joined the attacker. Caleb's gut tightened. More than one. He raised the rifle, sighted carefully, and squeezed. The nearer rider jerked back, a cry of pain lost in the wind. The horse reared, scattering snow and sparks. "Caleb!" Lydia's voice cut across the chaos. "Behind you!" He spun as another figure charged from the opposite tree line, pistol raised. A hired gun, face half-mast with a scarf. Caleb dropped to one knee and fired. The man tumbled from the saddle, weapon skidding across the ice. The first rider, Byrne himself, broke cover, spurring hard toward the creek. Caleb sprinted after him, boots crunching, lungs burning in the frigid air. The Winchester's barrel gleamed with frost. "Byrne!" he shouted again. "This ends here." Byrne twisted in the saddle, firing blindly. A bullet sang past Caleb's ear. Caleb dove behind a drift, the cold biting through his coat. He rolled, aimed and shot. Byrne's hat flew off, but the man clung to his horse and pushed for the trees. The creek ahead lay sheathed in ice, moonlight finally breaking through the clouds to silver its surface. Byrne tried to cross at a gallop, The ice groaned, then shattered with a sound like breaking glass. Horse and rider plunged into the black water. Caleb scrambled to the bank as Byrne thrashed, cursing, the current dragging him toward a jag of broken ice. Caleb leveled the rifle, but hesitated. Murder in cold blood was a line he'd never cross. Grab the reins, Caleb barked, or drown. Byrne's eyes flared white in the moonlight. For a heartbeat, pride held him frozen. Then survival won. He clutched the saddle horn and kicked toward the far shore, hauling himself onto the ice, soaked and shivering. Caleb kept the Winchester trained, but lowered his voice. It's over. You've got nothing left but the law. Byrne staggered to his knees, water streaming from his coat. This isn't, he coughed, teeth chattering. Over. The deputies will hear of tonight, Caleb said. Arson. Attempted murder. You'll answer for it. Byrne's shoulders sagged under the weight of the truth. He turned, slipping on the ice, and fled into the trees, leaving the half-drowned horse to scramble after him. Caleb stayed until the forest swallowed the sound of retreat. Only then did he lower the rifle and draw a slow, steady breath. Back at the ranch, the barn was a black skeleton against the paling sky. The fire had finally burned itself out. Reed and Joss were stamping the last smoldering edges, while Lydia waited at the gate, face streaked with soot, eyes luminous in the dawn. He's gone, Caleb said, voice rough. For now. She stepped close, laying a soot-stained hand on his chest. You could have killed him, she whispered. I nearly did, he admitted. But that's not the kind of home we're building. Her hand lingered, warm even through the cold. Then we start again. Together. Around them the first blush of sunrise lit the snow in soft rose and gold, a fragile beauty born from ruin. The cattle shifted in the corral, alive, waiting for the day. Caleb looked at the blackened barn, at the stubborn line of smoke twisting into the sky, and then at Lydia, her steady gaze, her quiet strength. Something inside him eased, a knot loosening. We'll rebuild, he said, stone by stone if we have to. No man owns this land but the one who tends it. No man owns you but yourself. Lydia nodded, a faint smile breaking through the ash and fatigue. Then let's begin. The sun edged over the mountains, throwing long shadows that reached like open arms across the snow. But beyond the glow, in the dark timber of the ridge, a single hawk circled, silent, patient, watching. Caleb followed its arc, heart tightening with a new unease. Byrne had fled, but the wild country held more than one kind of predator. The wind shifted, carrying the hawk's cry, high, cutting, and full of warning, as the day began.